227,000 American homes got a foreclosure filing in the first half of the year. If you saw that number online, your gut probably jumped straight into 2008, especially if you're trying to buy your first home right now. Those posts leave out one important thing. Foreclosures were frozen to almost nothing during the pandemic. So any move back toward normal looks enormous on paper. By the end of this video, you'll see what's really behind that big number and why it changes almost nothing about your own plan to buy it. Let's break down what that number actually means, because it's not what most people assume. A foreclosure filing isn't a family handing over the keys. It's any step in the legal process, which includes a first warning notice, a scheduled auction, or a bank finally taking a home back. So a lot of those 227,000 homes are early in the pipeline, and plenty of them have never even gotten to the end of it. If you look at the homes banks actually repossessed in that same stretch, the count was about 27,983 to be exact. That's a small slice of the scary headline number, and it's still lower than it was back in 2020. Now, here's the piece that should slow your heart rate down. Those filings landed on 0.16% of homes in the country in the first half of the year. That works out to about one filing for every 632 homes, which is fewer than 2 homes out of every 1,000. It feels like everyone on your street is losing their house, but the data says the opposite is closer to the truth. So yes, the number climbed 21% compared to last year, and that jump is real. Thing is, a percentage like that does not mean what your gut thinks it means. And once you see where it started from, that 21% stops being scary. Think back to what happened during the pandemic. The government stepped in and basically hit a pause on foreclosures, with payment breaks and rules that stopped banks from taking homes. Foreclosure activity dropped to almost nothing, and the rate dropped to 0.11% in 2021, which was the lowest we'd seen in 2 decades. So when you start from almost zero, everything looks like an explosion on the way up. That's the trick hiding inside these headlines. Foreclosure stats are running 66% higher than the first half of 2020, and that sounds massive, until you remember 2020 was artificially frozen. You're comparing today against a year when the normal machinery of the housing market was literally switched off. The head of Adam, the company that tracks all of this, put it plainly when he said that the market is gradually returning to a more typical pattern. That's the whole story in 6 words. The pause button is coming off, and the people who were quietly struggling for years are finally moving through a system that had been holding them in place. Returning to normal and crashing are 2 completely different things, and the gap between them is a lot bigger than you'd guess. The comparison you actually need is today against 2008, because that crash is the fear sitting underneath all this. Back at the peak in 2010, the foreclosure rate hit 2.23%. More than 2 out of every 100 homes in the country were caught in it. Today we're at 0.16%. That's the difference between a wildfire tearing through a neighborhood and a campfire you can sit next to. It helps to remember why 2008 blew up the way that it did. Lenders were handing out mortgages to almost anyone, including loans that nobody checked if you could actually repay, and buyers were getting put into homes that they had no realistic shot of affording. When prices dropped, millions of people owed more than their home was worth, with nothing underneath them to soften the fall, so the whole thing collapsed at once. Now look, the market that you're buying into today works differently on purpose. After that crash, a lot of rules got tighter, and now our lender has to actually prove that you can pay before they hand you a loan. And the reckless products that lit the fire back then are mostly gone. There's one more piece, and it's the one that's really separated now from then. Home prices climbed for years, and most owners locked in low fixed rates during the pandemic. So a huge share of people have real equity in their homes right now. That means when someone goes through a rough patch today, they can usually sell their house or refinance instead of walking away with nothing, and that single fact stops the chain reaction that made 2008 spiral. On top of all of that, today's activity is actually running below where it was back in 2018. You know, back when the market was considered healthy and boring. This is why the economists that are watching these numbers aren't calling for a crash at all. They're expecting a slow grind on prices and affordability, not a collapse. So, if the whole system is safer now, something is still pushing these specific foreclosures, and it's worth knowing exactly what. The answer lives mostly in one corner of the market, and it's the corner that a lot of first-time buyers care about. Government-backed loans, the FHA and VA programs are doing most of the heavy lifting here, not the market as a whole. The gap is honestly striking. Around 11.5% of FHA borrowers are behind on payments compared to about 1.8% of people with a conventional loan. That's more than a 1 in 9 on the FHA side versus fewer than 1 in 50 on the other. For anyone that doesn't know, an FHA loan is the low down payment government-backed option that a lot of first-time homebuyers use to get in the door. There's a clear reason that side is under so much more pressure. The rescue plans meant to catch struggling FHA borrowers are failing 40 to 60% of the time, and the rules now let a borrower get rescued only once every 2 years. The VA side has its own problem. A program that used to lower veterans' payments got shut down, and the replacement doesn't really offer that same relief, so more of these loans slide toward foreclosure. There's also a slower squeeze behind all of it. As one servicing expert put it, higher taxes, insurance, and everyday costs are making it harder for people to recover once they fall behind, even when their actual mortgage payment never changed. This also isn't spread evenly across the country. Florida, South Carolina, and Indiana are carrying the highest rates by far, so a borrower in one market can be looking at a completely different picture than somebody 2 states over. The next number sounds backwards at first. Foreclosure timelines are actually shrinking, down to about 563 days on average, the fastest pace since 2013. A system that's finally moving cases through is a system that's working again, not one breaking down. So, let's talk about where all of this leaves you, the person actually thinking about buying a home. This is not a warning to sit on the sidelines and wait for the sky to fall. It's the housing market stepping off of years of emergency support and settling back to something normal. And normal is a market you can plan around. You don't get a vote on the national foreclosure rate, but you do control few things that actually decide how safe your purchase is. The first is the loan you choose. The second is how much cushion you build behind it. Almost everyone getting into real trouble right now stretched to the absolute edge of what they could afford and kept nothing in reserve. Run your numbers on a payment you could still cover if your car dies, your insurance jumps, or your income dips for a month. An FHA loan can be a great door into your first home, and I set people up with them all the time. Just walk in clear-eyed about the payment and with a real emergency fund, not on the hope that some program will catch you if things go sideways. The $227,000 headline was real, and so was the 21% jump, but the crash it made you picture is not the story here. The real story is a market settling back to normal, and the buyers who get burned the most are the ones that buy out of fear or buy on a wish. So if you want to see what your own honest numbers should look like, watch my video on how much house you can actually afford next.